They went after a student. They didn't realize they'd awakened a Death World survivor. The first time Rethan touched my food, I knew exactly what he was doing. I had been sitting alone in the university cafeteria, a long, open hall with ceilings so high they looked like the inside of a cathedral, lit by soft violet panels that the Velhari students found comfortable. When the tray slid back to me with something different about it, not visibly different, the food looked the same, but the smell had shifted, slightly, in a way that most species probably would not have noticed. I noticed. I set down my fork and looked across the room at where Rethan sat surrounded by his housemates, all 6 of them elegantly tall, with those long fan-like crests folded flat against their skulls in the casual way that meant they were pleased with themselves. I picked up the fork again and ate something else on the tray that he had not touched. That was my 3rd week at the Concordat University of Velnar. My name is Kale Voss. I was 22 years old when I arrived on Velnar Station, one of 41 humans enrolled in a student body of over 12,000, representing species from 37 different worlds. I had won a competitive scholarship from the Terran Diplomatic Exchange Program. My field was xenobiology, which meant I spent most of my time studying creatures that could kill a grown man in ways that most civilized species had never imagined. I was good at it. I had grown up in a place that gave me a head start, Earth. I know how that word lands with other species. I have watched the reaction enough times now to recognize every version of it. There is the polite version, where a student or professor widens their eyes slightly and says something like, "Oh, how interesting," and then quietly changes the subject. There is the academic version, where someone pulls up a data pad and starts reciting environmental classifications. Class 3 biohazard. Extreme geological instability. Atmospheric oxygen levels toxic to 11 of the 37 concordate species. Active megafauna predation zones covering 60% of habitable landmass. And then there is the honest version, the one that younger students give when they forget to be polite. Which is basically just staring at me like I am something that crawled out of a place that should not exist. All 3 reactions are correct. I grew up in the northern part of a country called Canada, in a region where the winters dropped cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 10 minutes, and the summers brought animals large enough to flip a vehicle if they felt like it. My mother was a wildlife biologist. My father maintained trail infrastructure for the Provincial Park Service. From the time I could walk, I knew the difference between safe and unsafe, not as an abstract idea, but as a physical feeling in the back of my neck, a pressure, a kind of awareness that never fully turned off, even in a place as clean and regulated as a Concordat University station. That awareness was the first thing I used when I understood what Rethan was. He was the eldest son of House Rethvar, one of the old noble houses in the Velhari hierarchy. On Earth, we would have called him a legacy student. His family had donated a wing of the science building. His professors knew his name before he arrived. His housemates were not really friends so much as an arrangement, other young men from related noble houses, who orbited him because it was useful, not because they liked him. I had figured that out by the end of my first week, just by watching how they moved around him, which ones leaned in when they spoke, and which ones waited to see his reaction before they allowed themselves one. The incident that started everything was small. A seminar on interplanetary ecosystem modeling, held in a circular room that reminded me of an operating theater. The professor, a Cathali named Dr. Yoon, had put up a projection of apex predator distribution data from 12 worlds. Rethan was explaining to the group, loudly, with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong in a room before, that Earth ranked among the mid-tier threat worlds in terms of megafauna, danger, comparable to Vethor Prime. I raised my hand. Dr. Yoon looked at me. Rethan looked at me. The room looked at me. I said politely that the comparison was not accurate. Vethor Prime had 4 confirmed categories of apex predators with significant human equivalent threat profiles. Earth had over 20, depending on how broadly you define the category. And that number did not include marine environments, venomous invertebrates, or the several dozen microscopic organisms capable of causing death within 72 hours. I also mentioned, as an aside, that the dataset Rethan was citing was from a survey conducted 40 years ago, and had since been significantly revised upward. I was not trying to humiliate him. I was being accurate. On Earth, correcting someone's data in an academic setting was just called participating in class. Among the Velhari, publicly correcting a noble in front of his peers was apparently something close to a declaration of war. I did not know that yet. By the end of that week, my access card had stopped working twice for no reason the system could explain. My personal locker in the xenobiology lab had been opened and my notes rearranged, not missing, just moved. just enough that I would know someone had been in there. In the common area of our dormitory floor, the conversation stopped every time I walked in. Rethon himself never spoke to me directly. That was not how it worked with him. He issued instructions through the network around him, and the network carried them out. And he sat at the center of it all with his crest folded flat and that look of practiced boredom on his face. I had seen that look before, not on a Velhari, on a large animal standing upwind of something smaller, watching it, deciding whether it was worth the energy to move. I started keeping notes, not angry notes, not emotional ones, a log, dates, times, incidents, exactly what happened, exactly who was present. My mother had taught me that. When you are in unfamiliar terrain and something starts behaving strangely, you document. You observe. You do not panic. Panic narrows your options to the worst ones. Clarity keeps all your options open. I also started eating alone more deliberately, choosing seats near the exits, keeping my food in my room where no one could reach it without breaking in. Small adjustments, not dramatic ones. The kind of thing that on Earth would have been called common sense. Here, in this clean, climate-controlled academic station where most students had never felt genuine physical danger in their lives, it probably looked like paranoia. I did not mind looking paranoid. Looking paranoid and being careful were two different things, and only one of them had kept my species alive long enough to reach the stars. The night that Rethon's housemate Sevar first spoke to me, I was sitting on the observation deck of the dormitory tower, watching the slow rotation of the docking ring far below. Sevar was younger than the others. Quieter. He had a habit of staying slightly further back from Rethon in group settings than the others did, which I had noted in my log as significant. He sat down next to me without asking, which meant he was either confident or nervous enough to skip pleasantries. He was nervous. I could tell by the slight elevation of his crest. In my xenobiology courses I had learned that involuntary crest movement in Velhari was the equivalent of a visible heartbeat. You could not control it under stress. He asked me, in a low voice, if I understood what was happening. I told him I understood fine. He said that Rethon had decided that I needed to leave the university. Not transfer, leave. And that he had the connections to make the academic review board move against me if he chose to. Without any evidence of wrongdoing on my part, I looked at the docking ring for a moment. Then I asked Sevar why he was telling me this. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said that he had looked up Earth. The corridor ambush happened 2 nights later. I had been coming back from the late lab session, which ran until well past the station's simulated night cycle. The transit corridor on sublevel 4 was mostly empty at that hour. Rethon was there with 4 of his housemates, not Sevar. They spread out across the corridor in a formation that I recognized immediately, not from anything I had read about Velhari behavior. From something more basic than that. From years of moving through terrain where other living things also moved, and learning to read the shape of intention before it became action. Rethon spoke to me. The translation unit on my collar rendered his words in flat, mechanical English, but the meaning was clear enough. He says I had made an error. He said I had confused a classroom with a place where my kind of opinion carried any weight. He said the review board would receive a formal complaint in the morning, and that by this time tomorrow I would be processing a transfer request back to whatever small, forgettable rock I had come from. I stood very still. That stillness confused him. I could see it in the way his crest shifted, a small involuntary flutter. He had expected something. Argument, maybe. Visible fear. Some kind of display. Instead, I just looked at him, and then I looked at the 4 behind him, and I did the thing that my grandmother had taught me when I was 8 years old. And we came around a trail bend, and found a very large animal, standing 15 feet away. I breathed out slowly. I softened my stance. I let everything in me go very, very quiet. The large animal, if it does not feel threatened, often simply walks away. Rethon did not walk away, but he hesitated. And in that hesitation, something that had been mostly dormant since I left Earth stretched open its eyes and looked around. I smiled at him. Not angrily, not nervously. I said, in a perfectly conversational tone, that the review board met at 9 in the morning. Then I said that I would be there at 8. I walked past all 5 of them and continued down the corridor, and I did not look back, and my heart rate was completely steady, and the awareness in the back of my neck was now fully awake and cataloging everything. 48 hours. That was what I had. I did not waste a single minute of them. The first thing I did when I got back to my room was pull up the university's academic grievance charter and read all 240 pages of it. I am not exaggerating every word. I took notes in a separate document, cross-referencing sections, marking inconsistencies, flagging the places where the language was vague enough to mean more than one thing. I had been doing this kind of reading since I was a teenager. My mother kept dense ecological reports on the kitchen table. My father read municipal land use policies the way other people read novels. In my family, a long document was not a burden, it was a map, and maps told you where the paths were. By the time the station's artificial dawn cycle brightened the window panels, I had found 7 clauses that Rethon's complaint would need to navigate, 2 of which required independent corroborating testimony from non-involved parties, and 1 of which specifically protected students from complaints filed within 30 days of a public academic exchange, which was a polite way of saying that you could not use the grievance system to punish someone for correcting you in class. That last one was useful, but a document is only as strong as the person presenting it, and I had learned a long time ago that being right and being believed were 2 entirely different things. I needed people. Here is something about humans that most other species do not fully understand until they see it in action. We are extraordinarily good at talking to people who are not like us. This is not a coincidence. It is an evolutionary trait. Humans coexisted for tens of thousands of years with dozens of other social species, and the ones among us who could read a non-human face, who could sense mood from body posture, from the rhythm of breathing, from the small involuntary signals that living things give off when they are afraid or defensive or simply uncertain, those humans survived longer and passed that ability down. Every human alive carries some version of it. Most of us just never realize it because we spend our whole lives surrounded by other humans. Put us in a room full of aliens, and it lights up like a navigation system turning on. I spent the next 6 hours doing something that Rethon, in all his noble house confidence, had never considered doing. I listened to people. I started with the general student forums, where complaints about housing, labs, and academic fairness were posted anonymously. I had been reading these casually for weeks, noting patterns. Now I read them with purpose. 3 separate posts from the past semester mentioned academic review complaints that had been filed and then quietly dropped before reaching a hearing. The language in each one was slightly different, but the pattern was the same. Someone had been uncomfortable. Someone had pushed back. The complaint had disappeared. I sent 3 private messages. I identified myself, explained briefly what was happening, and asked only one thing: whether they would be willing to speak on record. 2 of them replied within the hour. The third took 3 hours, and when she finally responded, her message was longer than I expected. Her name was Nina Calloway. She was a second-year human student in the architecture program, one of the other 41 humans on station. She had filed a complaint 6 months ago after a lab equipment allocation was changed without explanation, leaving her team without the tools they needed for a semester project. The complaint had been reviewed by a single administrator and dismissed in 48 hours. The administrator's name was in her documentation. That name appeared in the university's organizational chart as a member of the Velnar Faculty Stewardship Council, which received annual donations from 6 noble houses. One of those houses was Rethvar. I wrote that down twice. Nina agreed to speak on record. She also was giving me other names. One of them was Dr. Yoon. I had not expected that. Yoon was the professor from the seminar. She was Cathali, not human, and she held a senior research position that put her well above the level where she would normally have any reason to involve herself in a student dispute. But Nina told me that Dr. Yoon had been quietly compiling a record on House Rethvar for over 2 years, watching the way their students moved through the academic system, the way complaints against them evaporated, the way resources shifted in their direction without formal justification. She had been waiting, Nina said, for a case that was clean enough to use, one with a clear incident, a clear target, a documented timeline, and a complainant who was willing to stand in front of a tribunal and not be talked out of it. I messaged Dr. Yoon at just past midday. She responded in 11 minutes. She said, in the precise and careful language that senior academics use when they are choosing every word with intention, that she would be available to provide a formal statement to the tribunal. She also said, and I read this line 3 times, that she hoped I understood the university's corroboration requirements, and that I had been thorough. I told her I had read all 240 pages of the grievance charter. There was a pause. Then she wrote back one line, good. The second thing I had learned from my father, after the importance of reading the map, was to follow the physical evidence. Bureaucratic systems leave trails. Every resource request, every room booking, every requisition for lab materials goes through a digital log that somebody, somewhere has to authorize. The food tampering was the clearest incident I had, because I had smelled the change before I consumed anything, and therefore had never been harmed. But I needed to connect the action to the person. I went to the Xenobiology department's resource log, which was accessible to all enrolled students in the program. I was not looking for anything dramatic. I was looking for timing. The incident with my food had occurred on a Tuesday evening. I pulled up every lab material requisition submitted in the 4 hours before the cafeteria opened that evening and filtered for anything involving organic compound modifiers, which was the polite academic name for substances that could alter the smell or composition of food-grade materials. There were 9 requisitions. 7 were from ongoing experiments with documented supervisory sign-off. 1 was a blanket standing order from the greenhouse section. The 9th was a single-item request, filed under a lab assistant account, for a quantity of a specific biochemical modifier used in olfactory aversion studies, filed at 14 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, signed off by the same administrator whose name had appeared in Nina's documentation. The lab assistant account that filed the request had last logged into the university system from a terminal in the dormitory block occupied exclusively by Noble House students. I saved everything to 3 separate encrypted backups on 3 separate servers. Then I went to find Savar. He was in the common room at the end of the Noble House corridor, sitting alone with a cup of something warm, staring at nothing in particular. He looked up when he saw me and his crest gave that small involuntary flutter again. I sat down across from him without being invited, which I had learned from my weeks of observation was the Velhari way of signaling that you were treating someone as an equal, not waiting for their permission. He blinked, his crest stilled. I told him what I had, not all of it, enough. Then I told him what I was going to do with it. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the common room window, the station's exterior lights had shifted to their evening spectrum, long amber bars cutting across the dark. He asked me why I was telling him. I told him the truth. I said that I had watched him for weeks, and that the way he stood near Rethon was not the way someone stood near a friend. It was the way someone stood near something they were not sure how to get away from. And that if he wanted to get away from it, the morning was his best opportunity, because after the tribunal, the ground around Rethon was going to be difficult to stand on. I also told him that I was not asking him to betray anyone. I was asking him to tell the truth about what he had seen. That was all. He stared at his cup for a very long time. Then he asked me what Earth was really like. I thought about it honestly. I told him it was loud, and it smelled like rain and wet soil, and something faintly chemical that you stopped noticing after a while. I told him the nights were dark in a way that station nights never were, dark enough that the stars looked close. I told him that where I grew up, there were mornings in late summer when the mist sat in the valley below the ridge, and the world felt enormous and very still, and you knew, standing there, that you were not the largest thing in it, that you had never been the largest thing in it, and that somewhere along the way, that stopped being a frightening thought and became something almost like a comfort. He was quiet. Then he said that he would be at the tribunal. I thanked him, stood up and went back to my room. I did not sleep. I did not need to. I had spent enough nights in enough situations where resting was not an option, and learned to function clearly through them. Instead, I organized everything, built the presentation sequence, and ran it 3 times in my head until the order was so familiar I could have delivered it in my sleep. The message from Nina came at just past 2 in the morning. She had spoken with 4 other students who had silent grievances connected, directly or indirectly, to the same administrative network. 2 of them had agreed to submit written statements by 7. The others were not ready to go on record but had provided supporting context that Nina had documented in her own statement. I acknowledged the message, added the new informations to my files, and updated the presentation. By 7:45 I was showered, fed, and sitting in the corridor outside the tribunal room with a cup of tea and a completely clear mind. At 8 o'clock, the tribunal secretary arrived and found me already there. She looked at me with an expression that I had come to recognize over my weeks on station. It was the look that said she had not expected a human to look quite this calm. I gave her my access card, signed the entry log, and sat back down with my tea. At 8:53, Rethon arrived. He had 3 legal advocates with him, all in formal house robes, and a senior administrator I had not seen before walking slightly behind and to the left, which in Velhari positioning signaled support. His crest was fully elevated, a display of status and confidence that filled the corridor with color. His housemates had assembled near the far wall. Behind them, via HoloLink projected from a small device on an advocate's belt, a face watched from what appeared to be a very expensive room. I assumed it was someone from the house leadership, someone who expected to watch a formality conclude quickly. Rethon looked at me. I looked back at him. Then I looked down at my tea. Whatever he had expected to see, it was not that. His crest dipped slightly, just once, before he controlled it. I finished my tea, set the cup aside, and picked up my datapad. The tribunal doors opened at exactly 9 o'clock. I walked in first. I had 30 minutes to present. I used 28. I did not perform. I did not attempt to be dramatic or emotional. I stood at the presentation panel with my files open, and I went through them in order, speaking clearly, and at a pace that allowed the 3 tribunal members to follow the documentation without rushing. The food incident, the locker access, the lab requisition with the administrative signature, the connection to the donation records, Nina's case, the 2 anonymous cases, the timeline showing a consistent pattern across multiple incidents over 6 weeks. I cited the specific charter clauses. I named the corroborating witnesses and noted which had submitted formal statements and which would be available for direct questioning. I noted the specific corroboration requirement that Rethon's complaint would need to satisfy and pointed out that the incident it referenced had occurred 22 days after the seminar correction, placing it within the 30-day academic exchange protection window. When I finished, I said thank you and sat down. The lead tribunal member, a Catholic woman whose name I had learned from the charter documentation, was senior. Adjudicator Velmar looked at the file on her display. She looked at Rethon's legal team. She looked at the HoloLink projection of the face from the expensive room. Then she called a recess. In the corridor, Rethon dismissed his housemates with a gesture and crossed the hall toward me. His advocate stayed near the door. The HoloLink had been switched off. Up close, without the formal staging of the hearing room, he looked younger than he usually did. The confidence was still there, but underneath it something had shifted. His crest was at half elevation, which in the xenobiology texts I had read meant a species under threat choosing between options. He told me quietly that this was not over, that his house had influence on this station that went beyond any tribunal decision, that I did not understand the network I was challenging and the things it could do to make life difficult for someone without connections, without a house, without history here. He was not entirely wrong. He did have those things. The network was real. The history was real. But here is the thing about Deathworlders. We do not evaluate threats by how large they are. We evaluate them by how much ground we have already covered and how much we still have to go. I looked at him for a moment. Not angrily. Not triumphantly. With the same quiet that I had used in the corridor the night before, I said in a very normal voice that I had grown up in a place where the things trying to make my life difficult were considerably less organized than a noble house network. I said that I had documented everything, backed it up in multiple locations, and that Dr. Yoon had a copy of the full file on an independent server that would automatically go to the Concordat Academic Standards Office if anything unusual happened to my enrollment status in the next 90 days. I said this had nothing to do with hatred, or revenge, or any personal feeling at all. It was just process. Then I said that he was welcome to continue, but that I had already thought about every path this could take, and I was comfortable with all of them. He stared at me. In the back of my memory, without choosing to recall it, I heard my grandmother's voice from a long time ago. She had been a small woman with very steady hands, and she had said this to me once, sitting on the porch steps watching the tree line. The difference between a predator and prey is not size. It is not even strength. It is the answer to one question. Who is afraid of whom? Rethon turned and walked back to his advocates. Inside the tribunal room, Adjudicator Velmar was reviewing a document that I was fairly confident was the administrative donation record. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When we went back in, the lead advocate for Rethon stood up and withdrew the complaint. No explanation, no statement. The complaint was formally withdrawn and the record was sealed, which under charter rules meant the filing itself would remain on record as a withdrawn complaint, a notation that, per the very charter I had read twice cover to cover, remained visible to any future academic review processes for a period of 5 years. I thanked the tribunal members for their time and walked out. Sevar was in the corridor. He had not needed to speak. His written statement, submitted at 6:50 that morning, had been enough. He looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read, something between relief and a kind of careful wondering. Nina was there too, standing near the window with her arms folded, watching me come out. I nodded at her. She nodded back. Dr. Yoon met me near the lift. She said nothing for a moment, just looked at me with those layered Cathali eyes that always reminded me of light through deep water. Then she said that she was going to recommend I be moved to the advanced research track at the start of the following semester. I said I appreciated that. She said she was not doing it as a favor. She was doing it because I had demonstrated the single most important research skill there was, which was the ability to collect evidence under pressure without letting the pressure corrupt the quality of the evidence. I thought about that as the lift doors closed. Then I went back to my room and slept for 11 hours. 3 weeks after the tribunal, things were quieter, but they had not settled all the way. Rethan was still on campus. The complaint had been withdrawn. The administrative connection had been flagged for a separate university review, and 2 of his housemates had transferred to other institutions for reasons that were officially listed as personal, but that everyone in the xenobiology department apparently knew perfectly well. He no longer moved through the university with the same ease. His advocates were gone. The HoloLink face from the expensive room had not reappeared, but he was still there, and the network around him, diminished as it was still functional. I had known from the beginning that the tribunal was not an ending, it was a stabilizer. It bought space and it changed the public record, but it did not eliminate the original problem, which was a person who had decided that I did not belong here, and was willing to use whatever remained available to him to prove it. I understood this without resentment. It was simply a situation, and situations required reading, not emotion. What I had not anticipated was the invitation. It arrived through the Student Events Board, which circulated weekly notices about social gatherings, cultural exchange events, and orientation activities for new arrivals. A welcome reception for third-quarter new students, hosted in the commercial district of Level 7, the part of the station that existed slightly outside the university's direct jurisdiction, where different rules applied and the administrative oversight thinned considerably. It was a real event. It was publicly listed. It had a genuine host organization, a student welfare group that had been running events like this for years. The message I received was from that group's official account, but the specific invitation, the one suggesting I might enjoy attending, with a note that several xenobiology students would be present, came through a secondary address. I checked the routing. It had passed through a relay account linked to a terminal in the Noble House dormitory block. I sat with that for a while. The invitation was bait. That was clear. But bait had 2 possible uses. You could avoid it, in which case nothing changed. Or you could take it, in which case you needed to know exactly what you were walking into before you walked in. I spent the next 4 hours on preparation. First I messaged Savar and asked, without explaining why, whether Rethan had any planned activities that evening. Savar took 30 minutes to reply. When he did, he said only that Rethan had mentioned attending something off campus and that his remaining housemates had not been invited, which was unusual. Small group, chosen participants, off formal jurisdiction, I noted all of that. Then I did something that I had done many times before, though never in a space station and never with aliens as the relevant variables. I walked the terrain. I took the Level 7 transit and spent 2 hours on a slow, ordinary walk through the commercial district, buying nothing, talking to no one in particular, just moving through the space and learning it. Exit points, lighting levels, where the foot traffic was dense and where it thinned, which corridors fed into which larger thoroughfares, where the station's security posts were. It was exactly what I would have done before an unfamiliar trail in an environment where conditions were uncertain. 2 exits fed directly into the main transit corridor from the event space. One was a wide public arch near the entrance. The other was a narrower service passage on the east side that connected to the maintenance lift network. I tested the service passage door with my student card. It opened. I noted that too. I went back to my room and changed into something simple and unremarkable. I ate a full meal because I had learned before I was a teenager that the difference between thinking clearly and thinking poorly often came down to whether you had eaten recently. Then I picked up my personal comm and sent a precise message to Dr. Yoon, giving her the address of the event, the time I planned to arrive, and asking her to flag my location data from my card's passive signal if I did not send a check-in message by 200 hours. She responded immediately. She said, "Understood, and please be careful." And also, that the Concordat Xenology Board had been in contact with the university's ethics committee about a pattern of behavior that had nothing to do with me personally, but that my recent tribunal documentation had contributed to materially. I thanked her and put my comm in my pocket. Level 7 was busy when I arrived. The reception was already running, music from 3 different cultural traditions mixing in a way that was either deliberate or accidental but somehow worked. The room was large and open, with a high ceiling and rounded walls that were a feature of the older construction on this part of the station. I estimated between 60 and 80 attendees, a genuine mix of species and year levels, mostly gathered near the refreshment stations and the cultural display tables. I took a position near the east wall, close to the service passage, with a clear line of sight to the main entrance. I helped myself to something that was not food as I understood it, but was safe for human consumption, and tasted faintly of something I could not name, and I watched the room. Rethon arrived 14 minutes after I did. He came in through the main entrance with two individuals I had not seen before. They were larger than his usual housemates, with a different carriage, a different way of moving through the space. They were not students. I was reasonably certain of that within 20 seconds of watching them. Rethon spotted me quickly. The room was crowded, but not crowded enough to lose someone if you were looking. He began moving through the crowd at a casual angle that was not actually casual at all. I had seen that kind of movement before, the slow approach that uses other people as cover, that keeps the body angled so it does not look purposeful from the outside. I set down my drink. I want to be clear about what happened in the next few minutes, because I think it is important to describe it accurately and without making it sound like something it was not. It was not a heroic confrontation. It was not clean or comfortable or anything that would look impressive described from the outside. It was fast and it was ugly, and it was decided by approximately 30 years of accumulated human instinct. When Rethon and the two larger individuals reached the east wall, they were not prepared for me to already be moving. Not retreating. Moving laterally, toward the service passage door, which I had already confirmed would open. They adjusted. The two larger ones split to cut off the angle. What they did not know, what I had known since childhood without ever being taught explicitly, was that when something is trying to corner you, the most dangerous thing you can do is go where it expects. I did not go through the service passage. I went through them, not in the sense of a direct confrontation, in the sense of a very fast change of direction, a low center of gravity, and the use of the narrow gap between two people who were not quite coordinated with each other, because they had not worked together long enough to anticipate the same moves. I had grown up navigating terrain that punished hesitation. I did not hesitate. What followed was brief. The corridor outside the reception room was not empty, which helped. The two larger individuals were strong and fast, but they were used to dealing with species that responded to size displays by backing away. I was not backing away. I was moving, and I was continuing to move. And the problem with humans, the problem that every other species underestimates until it is too late, is that we do not stop. There is a concept that has been studied in Earth evolutionary biology called persistence hunting. Early humans did not chase prey by being faster. They chased it by being relentless, by following at a steady pace, through heat and distance, until the thing they were pursuing was exhausted and they were not. We are not the strongest animal on Earth. We are not the fastest. But we were built over millions of years to keep going after everything else has stopped. That is what I did. I did not win because I was powerful. I won because I was still moving when they were not, and at a certain point, the calculus changed. The two hired individuals looked at each other. They looked at me. They made a decision. They left. Rethon was still in the corridor. His crest was fully raised, which in the text meant extreme distress. He was breathing rapidly. I was also breathing rapidly. I had a cut above one eyebrow where I had caught a wall corner at speed and a bruise forming along my left forearm. Nothing serious. Nothing that would require more than basic first aid. I looked at Rethon. I was not angry. I want to be very clear about that. Anger uses energy you need for other things. What I felt was something quieter. The same quality of awareness that had been sitting in the back of my neck since the first corridor ambush. But fully present now. Fully open. Looking at the situation with complete clarity. I told him, in a very steady voice, that I had documented the invitation routing before I came. That my location data was being passively monitored by a faculty member, that the two individuals he had brought were going to appear on level 7 security footage, arriving with him and leaving without completing whatever task they had been given, that this evening, on top of the existing tribunal record, on top of the administrative review already underway, was going to complete a picture that was now entirely outside his ability to manage. I told him that I had not wanted any of this. I had wanted to study xenobiology and drink that strange drink that tasted like something I could not name and go to bed at a reasonable hour. I had not come here to make enemies. I had not come here to make a point. But I was from Earth, and the one thing Earth had made absolutely certain about every single creature that survived on it was this. We did not go quietly, and we did not go easily, and we had been deciding not to be prey since before we had language to describe the choice. Rethon stared at me. His crest came down slowly. all the way flat, in a gesture that every xenobiology text I had read described the same way. Total withdrawal. Submission. The end of the confrontation. Turned and walked back into the event space. I took out my comm and sent Dr. Yoon the check-in message. Then I found a quiet spot in the corridor, sat down against the wall, and waited for the station's security team, whom Dr. Yoon had apparently already called, because she arrived with them 11 minutes later and gave me a look that I could only describe as the expression of someone who had suspected something like this might happen and was not entirely surprised. The security report was filed that night. Rethan left the university 12 days later. There was no announcement. His name simply stopped appearing in the enrollment records. His remaining housemates filed transfer requests over the following 2 weeks, one by one quietly, without explanation. The dormitory block that had been designated for Noble House residents was reassigned to general student housing. The administrator, whose name had appeared in Nina's records and in the lab requisition signature, was placed on indefinite leave pending the ethics committee investigation. None of this was because of me exactly. It was because of the record, the long, careful, documented record that had been building since the first week. When I noticed the smell of my food had changed, and I set down my fork and started paying attention. The medical bay on level 3 was a clean, well-lit room that smelled faintly of the same antiseptic compounds used in clinics on Earth, which I found oddly comforting. The medic on duty was a young Cathali woman named Priel who moved efficiently and asked precise questions and did not seem particularly bothered by treating a human, which I appreciated. She cleaned the cut above my eyebrow, confirmed the bruise on my forearm was soft tissue only, and gave me a cold compress and a small tube of something she said would reduce the discoloration by morning. Then she asked me, in a professionally neutral tone, whether I wanted to know what Rethan had said when security took him. I told her yes. She looked at her notes, then looked at me. He had said in Velhari a phrase that she translated carefully. What is that thing? Not who is that person. Not what is that student. What is that thing? I stared at the ceiling of the medical bay for a moment. The lights there were a soft pale blue, calming by design. I thought about my grandmother, who had been a short woman with gray in her hair and hands that were always slightly rough from outdoor work, and who had said to me once, after a very difficult summer, that the most important thing you could know about yourself was not what you were capable of, but what you would do when you had no good options. When the path was closed and the weather was bad and the terrain was unfamiliar and there was nothing left but the decision to keep moving anyway. I thought about the bear on the trail, about the way it had looked at us, large and unhurried, curious in the way that animals are curious, without malice and without fear, simply assessing. We had stood very still. We had not run. We had not made ourselves small. We had simply been present, calm and aware, and after a long moment the bear had lowered its head and moved on. Not because we were powerful, because we were not afraid. I asked Priel to pass along a message when she had the opportunity. She looked up. I said, "Tell him I'm a student." She wrote it down. She seemed like the kind of person who took notes carefully, which I respected. When I left the medical bay, Dr. Yoon was in the corridor. She was carrying 2 cups of something warm, and she handed me one without comment, and we walked together toward the observation deck at the end of the hall. The station's night cycle was at its deepest point, the exterior panels dark, the stars visible through the wide observation windows in the long, unhurried way they always were, scattered and silent and very far away. Dr. Yoon said, after a while, that the Concordat Xenology Board had contacted her directly that afternoon. The incident reports from the evening, combined with the existing documentation, had triggered a formal review of Earth's planetary classification. It was currently listed as Class 3 biohazard. The board was proposing a reclassification to Class 6. I asked her what Class 6 meant, practically speaking. She said it meant that any Concordat student, staff member, or administrative personnel interacting with a Terran national would be required to complete a mandatory cultural briefing before the interaction. It also meant that Terran nationals on Concordat stations would receive automatic elevated security consideration, which translated in practice to better housing assignments, priority access to medical facilities, and a formal notation in their personnel file that any complaint against them required senior review before it could proceed. I thought about that. I said that seemed like a lot of paperwork created by one student correcting someone in a seminar. Dr. Yoon said, without any change in her expression, that she did not think it was the correction that had caused the paperwork. I looked at the stars for a while. She said that the review board's working notes, which she had been provided as a contributing faculty member, described sequence of events as what they called an unprovoked engagement with a Terran national, resulting in complete institutional dismantlement of the aggressor network. She said the phrase complete institutional dismantlement had been used by a senior board member who had clearly never had to dismantle anything himself and was impressed by the efficiency. I told her I had not been trying to dismantle anything. I had been trying to stay enrolled. She said those were not always different things. We finished our drinks. Dr. Yoon said goodnight and went back toward the faculty residences. I stayed on the observation deck a little longer, watching the stars through the wide panels. Some of them were systems I had studied. Some of them were the homes of people who were now aware of what Earth was in a way they had not been a month ago. Somewhere in those systems, in the databases and records of the Concordat Academic Standards Office, there was a file with my name on it. I had never read it. I did not particularly want to, but I could guess roughly what it said. Not the specifics, the shape of it. Something like Kale Voss, Terran National, Xenobiology Candidate, Origin World Earth. Something about the classification review. Something about the tribunal, the security report, the administrative investigation. Numbers and dates and reference codes, the bureaucratic skeleton of a story that was more complicated than any file could contain. And probably, somewhere in the notes section, something that someone had added at the end. A flag, a notation, a reminder for whoever read the file next. I did not know what it said exactly, but I knew what it meant. Do not assume. Do not underestimate. Do not mistake quiet for harmless or patience for weakness. The creature that comes from the difficult world, the one that grew up in the cold and the dark with large things moving in the trees, and learned, walk toward the sound instead of away from it. That creature is not defined by how loud it is or how large it appears. It is defined by what it does when there is no safe option, by whether it keeps moving, by whether it remembers, in the moment when everything becomes uncertain and the path is closed and the lights are out, that it has been here before. Not here specifically, not on this station, not in this corridor, not with these specific problems, but in the dark, with something larger, and it walked out the other side. I took the cup back to the recycling station near the lift. I pressed the call button. I watched the indicator light move from floor to floor, unhurried, doing exactly what it was built to do. The lift arrived, the doors opened, I stepped in, and the station moved around me. And somewhere in the distance, the stars continued doing what they had always done, burning steadily in the dark, sending out their light across distances that took years to cross, indifferent and ancient and completely unaware that one small creature from one difficult world was standing in a lift on a space station going home. The doors closed. I pressed the button for my floor. I thought about Nina, who had built her career on careful documentation and who was now quietly one of the most respected student advocates in the university's informal network. I thought about Sevar, who had calmed me last week to say that he had enrolled in an Earth ecology elective and that the course materials had given him what he described as a significant amount of renewed perspective. I thought about the new cohort of human exchange students arriving next semester and the talk I had agreed to give them at their orientation and what I was going to say. Not much, I had decided. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required a long explanation or a detailed history of what I had been through. Just two things. The first thing my grandmother had told me, which was that if something is hunting you, the worst thing you can do is act like prey, and my own addition, which I had worked out somewhere in the long weeks between the seminar and the medical bay ceiling. Smile a lot. The unfamiliar is more unsettling than the hostile, and you are already unfamiliar enough. The lift stopped. The doors opened. I walked down the corridor to my room, and the quiet followed me all the way, and it was the good kind of quiet, the kind that is not empty but full, the kind that comes after something is finished and the world has had a chance to breathe. I unlocked my door. I went inside. I set my comm on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in a long time I did not feel the pressure in the back of my neck. That old awareness, the one that had been keeping watch since before I could name it, was still there. It would always be there. That was what Earth had put in all of us, quietly, over a very long time, but it was resting, and that for tonight was more than enough.